Hello, everyone. I am Julie Meyer. You are watching Own Your Wellness, and I got to tell you, I'm excited. I almost didn't make it back from Denver. I had deboard the plane, and then they let me back on. Thank the Lord, because I did not want to come back in the middle of the night and then have to drive home an extra hour. So, phew, we made it. We're good. We're good to go. And I'm excited because today's guest is somebody that I know, and I actually really enjoy speaking with him. So I know you guys are going to love him too. His name is Joel Evan. Let's bring him onto the show. Welcome, Joel. Glad to have you here today.
What's up, Julie? Great to be here.
So, let's just get right in there. I mean, you and I know each other a little bit, but not everybody watching does. So I'd love for you to share a little bit about yourself and what you're up to.
Yeah, so man, my background is for 15 years I was a first responder. I was a first responder, and I was actually a police officer in some of the busiest cities on the West Coast. I worked in Oakland for 6 years, and anybody that knows the Oakland Police Department knows, or Oakland in general, is that 5 years in Oakland is considered a 20-year career anywhere else because it's just so busy. So I did that for 6 years. Went to San Francisco, and being a police officer was an amazing experience. I'm a third generation, learned a lot. I'm proud of the things I got to do, but over time, I just became disenfranchised with some of the work I was doing. And I felt like I really wasn't living the highest version of who I want to be. And so I embarked on things like life coaching and health coaching because that was really where a lot of my energy was being generated, and I felt aligned with it. And man, I'm really happy I did, because throughout my career, I just, again, like I said, I felt disenfranchised with it. And I left about 2 years ago, and I said, I'm going to go all in on my coaching business, which again was life coaching, holistic health. And here I am now. I don't want to say living the dream because that's so cliche, but and there is never, and it's not really a dream because it's hard work. Like, it's not easy. And going from the 9 to 5 mentality where you just punch in every day and you're going to get a paycheck, that doesn't happen in the entrepreneurial world, as you know, and the world where you are your own CEO, you are your own boss. And if you're not a good employee, then you probably can't be a good CEO. And so I've had to really rewire my brain and change the way I do a lot of things. And don't get me wrong, I've used some of those skills and brought it into my entrepreneur life, but I have had to do I've had to learn about surrender. I've had to learn about acceptance, and I've had to learn a lot of the skills that are required for an entrepreneur that are not required for an employee. And so I just want to make that distinction. And yeah, now here I am, having done that for the last 2 years. I've become very passionate with men's work and fatherhood, and being what I would say an elite dad and husband, because I wasn't always that way. And even though I was doing all these certifications and seminars and all these great things that I thought was great for my personal growth, my family life was still suffering. My kids were, I don't want to say they hated me. They didn't hate me, but there were times where my boys would kick me and spit at me, and I would have to leave the house. And I'm like, how is this happening? Like, these kids, they eat organic. They're never spanked. Like, they have a good life. Like, what is happening? Like, I didn't grow up this way. I would have never done that to my dad. And so, man, I had to hire a lot of parenting coaches, and I had to hire a lot of other coaches to fix this problem. And after 11 years of marriage, I can say maybe 10 of those years was absolutely tumultuous and rocky. And same thing with raising my boys. My oldest is 9, my youngest is 6. There were times where I was like, man, I just don't know what to do. I'd throw my hands up and say, like, it's not my fault, it's theirs. The more I have done this work, this men's work, the more I've realized it was me who was not stepping up and being the leader that my family deserved. And so right now, I'm just so passionate about some of this work that I'm doing. And I have a new coaching group that I'll probably launch in the next 2 weeks as we're recording this, called First Responder Fathers, really helping men build in that man, being the elite dad that their family and the husband that their wife deserves, and building those deep connections with their boys or their kids.
There's a lot of things. My mind was going a million different ways with questions, but I think the first thing I want to ask is, being a first responder, and you did that for so long, it's like you're a hero, and then you come home and it's not exactly like that for you there, but you're doing all these things for your family, and you think that you're being all like an elite father, an elite husband, and it's not being reflected back towards you in that way. That must have been really eye-opening for you.
It was, and a lot of guys go through this, specifically guys and first responders in general, because they. I tell everybody. I mean, there was most of my career. I would rather go to work. That was a safer place to be. Like I would rather, have that. My safety was being at work. I would rather almost, dodge bullets. Not that I ever really had to, but
Mhm.
man, I would rather take that chance than being at home because that didn't feel safe. And that's crazy to me to think that way. But I think yeah, I mean, a lot of first responders and a lot of men in general just feel that way. Like, look at all I'm doing. I'm providing for you. I'm going out, putting my life on the line. I'm doing all these quote unquote heroic things. And then I come back home and I'm treated like crap. I mean, that's the
Mhm.
perception. I'm not saying that's true, but that's what they feel inside. They feel like, man, like nothing I do is good enough. Like, come on,
Mhm.
you eat organic. You have a beautiful house. You're provided for. You don't have to work. So what's the problem? Like, how am I still not good enough? And
Yeah.
the thing I will stress to men, and that something I didn't understand, is that if you think killing and conquering is good enough, because by the way, that was the standard not too long
Mhm.
ago. If you look even back in the 1950s or around that time frame, men, their job was to go to work, bring home the bacon, and wives mostly stayed home. Women's rights were different. That's completely changed. Women can go out right now, get their own job, provide for themselves. I don't want to say, I know there's some technicalities. I was going to say they can make as much money as a man. Some people will argue that, but my point being is that they don't need you to just kill and conquer for them. They need
Yeah.
a certain type of man to not only do that. So the pressures that men are feeling is higher than ever. And you're right. I felt those pressures like none other. And man, I had to do a lot of deep work to unravel those. And I can tell everybody, luckily, there is an app for that, as I like to say. There's solutions for that, and you're not broken, you're not wrong. There's actually some things you can do that can start really transforming your marriage because it worked for me.
I really am glad we're having this conversation because as a woman, I can see it from your point of view too. It's like, what's wrong? I'm doing all the things, but you're never taught, how to like relate to your wife. You're never taught how to relate to your kids. Those are not things, especially if you have a manly job. Those are things that aren't, dudes don't talk about that. So how are you supposed to just know? And as a woman, it just comes naturally. So we're like, how do you not know?
Yep. Yeah, you nailed it. And I think as first responders too, specifically, just this niche of people, this group, I actually think like I was probably designed. I was by my
Mhm.
childhood wounds and the things that I use as protective mechanisms till this day. Those type of things, they actually made me a great first responder because I could detach emotionally. I could shut down. I could go into scenes where people were shot and bleeding and it was chaos, and I could just be like, hey, like this is no problem for me. So being able to detach in those emotional high sensitive scenes is a very good quality to have as a first responder. You actually want that. You want someone to be calm
Mhm.
and cool. That doesn't translate well to the family life or to the husband life at all, as you know. So yeah, it's you've got to be able to work with those skills. Interestingly enough too, I'm a big health guy, and I interviewed a guy, a DNA expert, and he even said, Joel, we can actually chart we know now that the DNA of first responders or people, that if they get in a gunfight,
Mhm.
they will like 100% of the time develop PTSD. And so I thought that was so interesting because I know several people that I've worked with that one simple incident, and I'm like, he went to that traumatic incident? That's not that traumatic. And he completely had to retire. And I'm like, I've been to so many of those. And so it kind of made me think, man, there's probably like, again, a DNA or just some wiring. Some of it's childhood. And then
Mhm.
there's also maybe some DNA component that really it sets us up for that, is what I'm saying. So it's really interesting.
Well, it's interesting too that you and I are having this conversation because I think I'm more wired like you than my husband is. So it's kind of fascinating because I'm the one that's kind of detached in the relationship. I'm the one that had to like learn to be, I don't know, do all the things that most women, it comes naturally. And for me, it was like, scary. It was very scary to just like almost be vulnerable and have these feelings and feel
Yeah.
them. And that was really scary for me. So I appreciate you doing the work because it is not easy. And I'm glad that you're helping other people, you know, be okay with that. And then also this idea of, hey, I've got an issue, I need a coach. I mean, how did you figure that out? Because it's not like you're taught that.
You're nailing it right on the head. Something I've come to the realization, and you mentioned this even earlier, is that, you know, you weren't taught this. And that is what I keep coming back to. And that's why I'm so like excited about this program, First Responder Fathers, because yeah, guys, we weren't taught this. Like there was no manual for me to read on how to be a good father. There was no manual for me to read of how to be a good husband. And I think a lot of us are just like, well, I'm just going to go out and quote unquote, hope I find the right one. And then like, if I do find the right, and if I don't find the right one, well, then I'll divorce that person and look for the next right one. That's the solution we just keep looking for over and over again. And what I've come to realize is actually, no, after having 10 years of marriage that was terrible and rocky and tumultuous, it's a skill just like anything else. If you go to the gym or if your entrepreneurial skills, we're talking about launching a business, those are all skills you have to learn. And that's the same thing. What if we actually brought skill development to our marriage and our families and fatherhood? Oh my God. Like, I think that's an untapped kind of resource, or really, and again, I don't know a lot of people that are teaching this self-development in those areas. There's a lot of self-development, as you know, in all these other categories that I just mentioned. So you're 100%, you're 100% right. And the last thing I'll say is, you said, was there like this moment? Yes, there was a moment. Again, I've gone and done all these certifications, all these seminars, and over the last couple of years, my wife looked at me and it was things were not going well, and she said, "Joel, like you need to hire a dad coach." And I like broke down. I was like, "Are you crazy? Like, no, I'm not hiring another coach. Like, I love personal growth. I love self-development. But at this point, I said, I've done all I can do. Like, there's
Mm-hmm.
nothing more I can do. It's not my fault. It's your fault. Like, at this point, you need to develop more. I look at all the certifications I have. Like, look how great I self-realized I am. And you know what? It's not my fault. It's the kids' fault. Like, they're the ones that are acting out. There's nothing more I can do as a dad, as a father. And she's like, no, I really like, she didn't give me an ultimatum, but it was a serious conversation. Like, you need help. And I'm like, okay, that's it. And I'm like, you know what? Fine. I will do this, and I'm going to hire this coach. And I've hired other parenting coaches, but I'm like, I'll hire another coach just to prove to you that I'm not the problem. And that was really my work. And believe it or not, Julie, lo and behold, I found out I was the problem, and I didn't want to admit that, but I was the problem.
It's not easy to admit. It really isn't. I mean, it's like here you are, and even though you may not be a first responder anymore, that's still a part of who you are. It's like that doesn't really go away. You're the person that saves other people. You're the one that, takes care of everyone. That's so what do you mean I'm the problem? I'm the one that fixes the problem.
Big time. And first responders, a big thing is, and I've had to really explore this on my own, is this idea of control. And we like to control scenes and scenarios. It's per our safety. If a scene is insecure, then it means it's out of control, and we can't operate in a zone that's not controlled. So everything we do is based on safety and control. If I'm stopping somebody or talking to somebody, I'm always mitigating risk and thinking, how can this person hurt me? How can I mitigate those risks? How can I gain control always in this situation so that I don't get hurt? And it's the same thing. And one of the big things for first responders is when they're they get in this equation of high demand plus lack of control, man, that's a recipe for disaster. And that's when you start to see things, unfortunately, in the first responder community more so than ever, is divorce is one of the highest in that category of professions than any other, and suicide. And so when you look back at some of these root cause issues, why is this happening to this community? Yeah, high demands, like you just mentioned and alluded to, and lack of control. When they feel out of control and they're given these high demands, you need to work more, you have shift work, and then the public hates you. You have to do this new policy every month. There's a new policy. They're becoming more restrictive. You can't do these things. You start to become apathetic. You become isolated. You become detached, more so depressed, and it's a recipe for disaster. Yeah.
Yeah, that's I'm glad that you're created this group because people need that. People need to feel like they're not alone and that they're understood even when the rest of the world doesn't get them. I mean, it's like I know so many people that could just benefit from you. So, I mean, I popped up your website before. Is this the best way to figure out how to get to this group, or?
Yeah, I've got a free Facebook group also called First Responder Fathers right now. The website is en route as well. But if people go there, they can see my website. That's just a tried and true one. They can shoot me an email, info@joelevin.coaching, because not everybody's on Facebook. But if you're on
Yeah.
Facebook, just request to join, and that's a great place for a lot of us to just level up, have some accountability, and also have other men. That was another big thing for me. Another big turning point was this idea of men's work. I was like, I don't need to talk to other men. Like, what are you talking about? Like, I don't want to. I don't want to share my feelings. Like, that just feels gross. What is that? And again, this is someone who's done a lot of training and certifications and coaching. So, like, I'm okay with these things. But even for me, I was like, I don't know if I really, what do I really need that for? And it's really powerful, believe it or not. And I will say to the men out there, many people, in our profession as first responders or police officers, I can speak of, there's this thing called choir practice. And so at the end of the night of a shift, many times like on a Friday night, say, hey, you guys want to do choir practice after work? Well, choir practice is a slang term for like, we'll grab some drinks. And so a lot of times we'll just grab some drinks and be in the back parking lot or whatever of the station. Nothing crazy. But what would happen is, that's a great place for us to offload and to just say, man, tell war stories and maybe complain about our wives and our kids and stuff like that. And although it's very cathartic, there's no real healing done. And one of my mentors said this to me, and he said, Joel, the bonfire is gone. He said, back in the days, in the ancient times, like, we had bonfires. We'd sit around a fire and we'd talk with other men at the end of the night and share our problems as a community. And like, man, we'd heal. We would heal there. We don't do that anymore. And all I could ever equate it to was this idea of choir practice. That's not healing. There's nothing healing about it. I mean, again, could be some catharsis getting some of those feelings out, but most of it's just complaining and telling war stories. So this is very different, and the work is transformational for sure.
I like that because the one thing I always talk about is unplugging. And it's more like, there's times when I would go sit and take the day off and maybe watch Netflix or something. And then I feel just as awful as I did before, maybe even worse. And it was like, it took me so long to figure out, it's like, I'm just avoiding. I'm not really, actually doing anything for myself. I'm just sort of like just not there. And so I like this idea of actually really, instead of just complaining, which does feel good, but
Yes.
actually, being solution versus just complaining. There is a difference. So I just wanted to point that out too.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's definitely a difference. So, I used to work in addiction recovery, and that was another one of those jobs where you're, helping people save their lives. And it was very thankless and very, very hard, and so much trauma and drama that you experienced secondary. And like, you had to just cut yourself off from all of those feelings that you have for people, because in order to do your job, in order to not get sucked into that, you couldn't feel what they're feeling. And I knew for me, it was time to quit when a past client I really cared about died. And my reaction was, oh, and that was my reaction. I just thought, okay, that's not just for work. It dawned on me that's how I show up in the rest of my life. And it's taken me years to come back to like feeling and all of that. So I'm curious, when people are looking for a coach, because not all coaches are created equal, what would you recommend looking for? Because I know it took you doing all these certifications and all this self growth and self reflection. I'm sure you figured out what worked for you and what didn't.
Okay, so I just want to make sure I answer this question right. You're asking what would I look for in a coach, or what would I do? What would be my first steps I'd start doing?
How about both? I want you to answer both of those things.
Okay. So when it comes to coaching, I listen. I'm a big person in vibration, and I really believe in that, and energy and law of attraction. And so you don't need to work with me. You can go work with anybody. I would just start. First of all, I would just start exploring the space. Like, what is this? I didn't even know there were dad coaches, parenting coaches. Like, that just seems ridiculous. But I would go start looking and just seeing, hey, what's the content that these guys are putting out with, and what they're saying, does that resonate with me? Because everyone's, like you said, story is going to resonate differently. Yes, I can tell you about all my accolades and coaching certifications and how I bring that into my what I do with these guys. And then also, I think luckily for me is like, I get it because I lived it. I lived what I call an invisible divorce for 10 years. And I know it's possible to actually get to the other side. I don't just say that like as a hoorah speech, like go out there and be the best. No, like I actually believe it because I just see what happens when the work gets put over consistently and consistently. Again, not only was it an invisible divorce I was leaving, but I had kids, and my kids, were spitting on me and kicking me and they were hating me. They don't do that anymore. So I know with this consistent practice and work, when you start to develop these skills, it is actually possible. So I think having a coach that gets that and has gone through it. And I would say probably my guess is if there are dad coaches out there, any other ones, they probably have lived it. There probably was a pain to purpose. So I would just go off of that and what do you resonate with, and what's their story, and how did they succeed, and how do they plan on getting you to that mountaintop per se, right? So that's number one. Now, when you talk about what are some first steps, I will say this. One of the first steps that I did, and I've mentioned it already, is you got to take ownership for the situation at hand. Okay. And so there's a famous quote, and I think anybody who's a first responder will love this, but Jocko Willink, who is a Navy SEAL, famous Navy SEAL commander that everybody pretty much knows now because he's blown up on social media and he says some great things. Well, one of the things he said in his book, Extreme Ownership, is there are no bad teams. There's just bad leaders. And that's true. The more I've come to think about it, he's 100% right. I would see that in my own life when I was a first responder. Always, the old timers would always complain about the new recruits coming in. Oh, these guys just don't do what we used to do. This is the TikTok generation, and I would say to them, you're 100% right. It doesn't matter. Times are always going to be changing. It's our job to adapt as leaders and teach them. Then, if they're TikTok generation, great. Then make sure I teach to them in a way that they absorb the information. I don't care about those things, right? That's the same thing you got to start bringing to your family. If the culture in your family is a disaster, well, then it's your fault. I hate to tell you guys, but it is your fault, and you're not stepping up as a leader. The more you lead, you will enroll and model the behavior you want in your family, and they will start to change. So it's so easy to just detach, become apathetic, be like, I've tried my best. I've done all I can. Believe me, I did that. And I understand. When I started taking ownership again of the culture of my family and realizing, holy cow, I haven't been leading properly. And these are kind of the skill development I'm talking to you about, that self-development. Everything will start to change. So number one is ownership. Number two is leadership. I've already mentioned that. Like, you got to be a leader. And there's so many ways you can start leading, but one will obviously be taking the acceptance of the responsibility on your hands, but then start taking control of that culture. What are some values? What are some new things that you are going to stand for in your family? One of the big things when I was doing all my health coaching, and I still do, is I always ask people, what are your values? And most of them will tell me, oh, Joel, integrity. I'm a generous person. And I'm like, man, that's so great. And I would say, what about health? Is health one of your values? And they would always do this, Julie. No, but it should be. It's the same thing with fatherhood and your relationship and your family. If you were to ask Joel 2 years ago, Joel, where is your family like values? Where do you see it? I'd be like, I don't know. I have values for myself. I have values for my own personal growth, but I never set standards for my family. And now looking back, what a tragedy. So what's your vision? What's your values for your family? And then the last thing I think people can do in just a nice 3-step process is look at what your big human needs are. And I'm going to kind of break this down for me personally. One of the big shifts I made, and I didn't realize, I kind of read about this later, but I had done it. And I'm like, oh, that's why things changed dramatically in my family, was that my needs was always about growth. Like I mentioned, growth, becoming better, learning, self-development, and validation, significance. I want people to know that I matter and that I'm good. And that's a very big thing we see in the nice guy syndrome category. It's literally, it's a syndrome. And a lot of first responder men have it, believe it or not. It's a common trait. And like you mentioned, like, I'm doing good enough. I just want to be the nice guy. Like, how come things aren't working? That's a very common nice guy syndrome technique we see come up a lot. And so I found myself doing that. And the reason is because I love and really need validation. I want my wife to know she loves me and that I'm doing good in her eyes. But the reality is, those were my big focuses. Those are like my top 2 focuses. Where was love and connection? My family was asking for love and connection from me over and over again, And I can tell you, Julie, it was somewhere at the bottom of my human needs. It was like, yeah, I don't know, like eventually I'll get love and connection. And I wasn't prioritizing that. When I started to shift my human needs, I put love and connection to number one. And then those other two things that I mentioned below, everything
Mhm.
switched. Everything changed because they were getting what they wanted. And so the most common thing I hear from guys right now is, Joel, how do I balance work-life balance? And how do I balance being present? And those things all correlate to what you just asked.
I love that. That was so good. On that note, we do need to go to a commercial break. So we're going to be back in just a minute. And for those of you who are watching us live, thank you so much for being here. We appreciate you. When we come back, we are going to continue this conversation. We're going to talk about Joel's new book, and we'll be right back in just a minute.
When drug or alcohol addiction take over, things begin to disappear. Your friends, your family, and eventually, you. Recommended by Dr. Phil, New Method Wellness can help get your life back with individualized treatment plans for dual diagnosis clients. New Method Wellness provides the most highly credentialed treatment in a safe and welcome environment. Call New Method Wellness for your free consultation and ask about our national accreditations. Together, we can put the pieces back together.
Welcome back, everyone. Let's bring Joel back to the show. Welcome back, Joel.
Hey.
So before we went to commercial break, I kind of touched on your book, but you do all kinds of things. And I just want to really make sure that we talk about this because this is exciting. Is this your first book or no?
First book, yeah.
What? So tell us about it.
Yeah, so the book is called Ignite. And, Julie, I'm a big holistic health nut. And I mean, I've been really I've always been that way. But I mean, in the last 10 years, I kind of mentioned about certifications. I almost thought about going back to either naturopathic medicine while I was a police officer or even chiropractic school. But because I knew it was just going to be too much for the family, I decided not to and embarked on multiple health coaching certifications. And so what I became a big proponent of is root cause issues. Like I was tired of going to the Western model hospitals, and that's how I grew up, right? Something, you have a cold, you go get penicillin. And I grew up in that environment. But, when I was 18, I mean, I just stopped going to that. I mean, I had earaches and I had an abnormal bone growth when I was like 10 years old. They had to come in, and it was probably because I drank soda every freaking day and had a poor diet, eating Cheerios, and I thought I was being healthy. And the fact of the matter, I wasn't. And long story short, I realized the Western model wasn't getting me results, and I got sick and tired of that. And so, my mother was diagnosed with cancer. This was like 10 years ago. And my mother-in-law had issues in thyroid. And I'm just like, this is a travesty. Like, I don't know how. I want to help these people, but I don't know how. I know a lot about health, but I don't know how. And so I was always seeking for doctors and naturopaths and people who actually understood health on a deep level and could teach me like the roadmap to getting people better. So when it comes to toxicity, detox, gut health, all that stuff, I wanted to know about it. And luckily I found some good mentors out there who did teach me that. And that has been a really big journey of me, this idea of root cause, holistic health, getting to the root cause so we can get people better. Well, in the last couple of years, you and I know that obesity and metabolic health has been a really, really big issue. And the last stat I saw back in 22 of July was right now, only 6.8% of Americans are metabolically healthy, meaning like They don't have issues with their glucose. They're not type 2 diabetic. They don't have cholesterol issues or heart disease or blood pressure. Those are all metabolic issues that we're talking about. And that was a travesty to me. And being a holistic health coach and getting people better, I couldn't understand it because I'm like, man, over the last 10 years, the biggest complaint I hear with people is time, and mostly time, right? It's just they don't have the time to work out. And I'm like, but I don't work out more than like 10, 20 minutes a day. So I'm like, how can I create something that I've seen with all my clients work, with over hundreds of clients that I've worked with personally one-on-one? How can I distill this information of being healthy? And it's really not that hard. That's what I wanted to get to. So this book covers that. It covers how to have the right, we get into everything. Cause again, for me, it's all about mind, body, soul. So I cover mindset. I cover detox, which not a lot of people talk about. I think it's a crucial component. I think everybody should be doing some kind of regular detox, at least, man, I do a regular one 4 times a year, but
Yep.
there needs to seasonal. I do seasonal ones, like you just said. Yeah. So I think, that should be a staple. And so I'm trying to expose people to things maybe they haven't heard of, and including exercise. Like, how does Joel, he's an entrepreneur, he's a family guy. How does he do it with only 10 to 20 minutes a day? And so I talk about some of the, it's not just me making it up. It's science that backs it up too. How do we build muscle in only 10 minutes a day? How do we build cardiorespiratory fitness with only 10 minutes a day? And so I talk about all these things, as well as habits and addictions that you just mentioned already. And I get into that because that's a big sticking point for people. How do they break bad habits? How do they create new ones? And as well as, prioritizing and execution. And that's a big thing too, that people, they might know all the knowledge, but now how do we put it together and create a lifestyle of health? And so that's what this book encompasses.
I love that. And I like the idea too. And I know you didn't say this specifically, but it's a way of being. It's not a destination. It's not like you get there and you're done. When you're done, you're dead. So that's really how it ends up being. But a lot of people still think that if they lose weight, for example, then they're healthy. Well, the absence of symptoms does not equate health either. So there's a huge misconception about what living healthy is. And like you mentioned before, I love this idea encompassing mind, body, and spirit, soul, however you want to put it, because it is everything. You can't just it's like baking a cake. If you forget to put in one ingredient, it's not going to taste the same. So I love this. I love that. So how long did it take you to write that?
I had a good coach, so it took me probably less than 9 months, and that wasn't all writing. I probably wrote the book in about a month and a half. I had a lot of things kind of pre-written, but that part didn't take long. It was actually just the editing and the book cover design, and some of those other things took longer, believe it or not. But the actual writing, it's funny because you and I both have podcasts. I've had a chance to interview a lot of authors, and you'll hear a lot of them go, I'll interview them and they're like in Mexico or something. I'm like, oh, what are you doing? And they're like, oh, I'm here for a month to finish my book, because they need a month to just sit down and knock it out. And that, you can do that in about a month if you're focused. So yeah.
No, I like that too, because it means you had it in you. It just needed to be told. And then the rest is just, finishing it up, putting the bow on it. So
Totally.
I like that. So where can people find the book?
The book's on Amazon right now. That's the only place that I have it on. But I think that's pretty good for most people. That's an easy. I know I'm getting a lot of requests to do the Audible version. It's in the making. As soon as I get a couple other things tied up, I know a lot of people like audiobooks, and so I'll make sure I knock that out.
Can you hold it up again so people can see it?
Absolutely.
I want to make sure, because for me, I always want to see it. So when I'm looking on Amazon, I'm like, that's the one. That's the one.
Yeah.
Thank you so much. I love that. So, there's something interesting too that I think that you would find fascinating is when I did work in addiction recovery, there's a lot of men that had eating disorders, just about as many as the women did. And it was interesting too, because it seemed like the more physically attractive the man was, and he looked healthy, he had an eating disorder. And it was really fascinating because he was never allowed to talk about it. It was so socially unacceptable. But being part of the treatment team, of course, I knew. So I thought it was interesting how, people can look healthy and look like they don't have any issues, but that's not necessarily the case. And I think that your book is a testament to that too. It's like, it's more than just the way things appear. It's more than that. So out of everything, what would be your favorite takeaway in the book?
To your note, you nailed it. I always tell people, listen, I am not here to get you to lose weight. I will never do that. I said, my job actually is to get you healthy, and the byproduct is weight loss, believe it or not. And it
Exactly.
blows their mind. And people will detox and do these things, and they'll lose 25 pounds in an 8-week period if they have that weight to give up. And it's just so crazy and so transformational. And that's my whole point is, yeah, like you said, we're changing and shifting the being part, the identity. You can never ever do, and that's why I don't believe in diets and stuff. There's a chapter in there called The Perfect Diet. It's kind of a joke, but if I always get asked, what diet should I? I'm like, well, listen, if you had to pick a schema for something, do something similar to this, and you should be good. But I can't ever say this is the perfect diet. Here's some rubrics. Here's some, framework I would use to distill that and pick a diet that works for your bio individuality, because we're all different, Now, we talked about it before. If I had to pick one chapter that I think nobody talks about and nobody really understands, is detox. And the reason is, and I'm so passionate about this, is not only do I see the results, but I also run labs as a practitioner, so I also see labs. Listen, when my son was 4 years old, I had a hair tissue mineral analysis ran of him. And so I wanted to see if there's any metals like, mercury, lead, aluminum, anything like that could be causing issues for him and his body. And a lot of people know, your listeners know, oh yeah, lead, I've heard of that. And yeah, guess what? It's a neurotoxin. So if your son or daughter has ADHD, and we immediately jump to that and we think, oh, he has learning disabilities. Maybe he's got a neurotoxin we don't know of. And I say this, so the test results came back at 4 years old. He had a high levels of lead. Okay. I was living in San Francisco at the time. The coach asked me, like, dude, what's going on with him? I'm like, I have no idea. Now, a couple things to that. One is women that when they're pregnant, their first child, unfortunately, gets the burden of their toxic load. Everything that a lot of their generational toxins gets brought to the child through the umbilical cord. So sorry, first child. So maybe it was that. I don't know. Maybe my wife gave him a good dosage of lead, or maybe there was something environmental, or maybe there were toys or something. I have no idea. But again, that's crazy, because a lot of us think, oh yeah, well, I start to get disease later in life. My son at 4 years old was already experiencing high levels of lead. So you never know when that toxic burden could be there. So that's just one thing to think about. If you go to the Environmental Protection Agency's website, the EPA, this is an organization that is supposedly out there to protect us, but they will tell you flat out on their website that you are being bombarded by 86,000 man-made toxins. They tell you that on their website. And so I always tell people, how do you get rid of these toxins? Where do they go? Right. And then now we're seeing more than ever, because it's on Joe Rogan and a lot of other shows, talking about plastics and parabens and how they're disrupting endocrine markers such as your hormones, estrogen, testosterone. There's a great book out there by Shauna Swan called Countdown. She goes into all of these things I'm talking about and saying how she's seeing a huge disruption of hormonal issues, all because of these plastics. And we think right now, sperm count for men is like the lowest it's ever been. It's like 50% of what it was in the 1950s. We're seeing the same thing with women. More so than ever, they need IVF therapy to get pregnant. We're seeing men in their early 30s or even 20s that want to be on TRT. Like, this is crazy. Like, that's never been the case. And so where is it all coming? It's coming from these toxins. And so that's why I'm a big proponent of having to do a regular seasonal liver detox, something that I do. And then there's some other things too. There's some other heavy duty detoxes you can do. But I think everybody should be doing some kind of seasonal detox. Really, really, really important.
I like that, because it's one of those things that it's sort of talked about, but nobody really understands why, or when, or all these different things. So I'm glad that you talk about that, because it is important. And you never know, because like you said, with your son, who would have thought lead? Who would have thought? So it's kind of crazy. Like, maybe part of the reason why you're having this issue is because of that. It has nothing to do with anything else. So it's like, yeah, I like this idea of getting labs done, how do you know which ones to get? Do you have to talk to a practitioner like you, or are there just certain ones? I mean, obviously you have to go to a practitioner to get them done, but how do you
Yeah,
decide?
I would recommend, consulting with a practitioner, a coach, or someone like myself first. Just one, and I mean, not because I'm trying to sell you labs. I could care less, but it
Mhm,
would really be to actually, I could probably save you money. Like
mhm,
I know how much it costs to run things for kids and myself. I will always say, here's everything you can do, and then here's, what the order I would do things in based on
mhm.
your needs and based on what you're telling me the symptoms are. So yeah, I mean that's I think a really solid recommendation because you want to narrow it down. There's so many things you can do. I mean, neurological health, could it be metals? Absolutely. But it could also, we also know the power of the gut brain connection, the gut brain axis. Could it be candida yeast overgrowth in his gut? He
Yeah,
had that too. So
yeah,
could it be parasites? It could be that. So there could be a host of reasons. Could it be just emotional health? Because there's
mhm.
that too. So there's a lot to kind of consider. And again, I like to look at all of those things. Let's do the gut stuff if we have the money. Let's do the metals and let's remove that. And let's work on the emotional. I think you got to do it all. I don't think it's just, oh, I just did this, or I only did talk therapy and it didn't work. Well, there's a lot of different things you can do, as you know.
Well, I heard recently too that typically yeast, parasites, and lead, or I should say toxic metals, they all tend to go together. So if you have one, you more than likely have another thing going on with you. So it's interesting that you mentioned about the yeast because with your son, it makes sense to me that, well, when things are out of whack, then they typically are out of whack.
Yeah, and let me just give you a quick, you just hit on something really important and it's present for me right now because I just went through this and and you're right, order matters. So if we were to do this, we would always do parasites, yeast, and then we would do the metals because believe it or
Mhm,
not, the parasites actually leach onto the metals. So if you remove metals first, you're still going to have leftover metals that the parasites are holding on to. So you got to remove them first. So order of importance does matter. I'm also going to give you a little highlight. I recently ran a hair tissue mineral analysis myself. I had an extra lab to run and I wanted to run it. I'm like, let me see my levels. Well, lo and behold, my levels look good. Other than that, I had low calcium.
hmm,
And I thought, oh, okay, well, I only ran one lab, Julie. So if you're low on calcium, what do? You buy calcium and you supplement for at least 3 months and see if your levels bump up. That's what any normal person does. I got another lab done because I was a little bit curious. And guess what? I had candida yeast overgrowth. So this is really interesting. And I had a food sensitivity to oxalates, things like
mhm.
spinach, which is
Yep,
considered a health food. I'm not,
nuts.
I eat a lot of spinach right now and I'm feeling bloated. I've been feeling bloated recently. And I was like, that's interesting. The labs proved my intuition was right. Yeah, I have some candida going on. Well, guess what? Oxalates bind to calcium. So I couldn't absorb it in the first place. So here I am going out and I'm going to go buy calcium supplements. Yeah, I'll
Uh-huh.
bump my levels up a little bit, but I'm never solving the root cause. So
Yeah.
yeah, these labs are helpful, but like you said, knowing the right ones is really important because you can save yourself some time and effort.
I really like that too because otherwise it's expensive pee, you know? So
100%.
yeah. All right. Well, we do have to go to one more commercial break. We're going to be back in just a minute. And I said hello to everybody who's watching us live. Now I'm saying hi to everybody watching us on demand. When we come back, we're going to continue this conversation about how to ignite your health. I love that. Anyway, we'll be back in just a moment. Welcome back, everyone. Let's bring Joel back. Welcome back.
Right.
So during the commercial break, I was just thinking about your book and about how everything comes back to mindset anyway. And because it's all connected. There's no one part that's more important necessarily than the other part. And you mentioned, about like emotional health. That is so, I mean, it is part of it. And that can actually physically affect you as well, because we do keep our issues in our tissues, as the saying goes.
Yeah.
So I'm curious too. What are your thoughts about, like, if somebody's unsure of what's going on with them, what would you recommend for them to be able to get in touch with? Because we intuitively know, but sometimes we aren't aware of our intuition. So how would you recommend somebody sort of tap into themselves to make at least some movement forward?
Yeah, that is such a good question. And as a practitioner, it's so easy for me, including, just when my own issues come up with my family, I have so much information. And so I'm always like, okay, well, would I do this first? Let me try this. Okay, that might work, but I've also got other modality, or I know other healers in the area I can bring my kids to. And so sometimes, it gets overwhelming. And then a lot of times, believe it or not, I'm sure you face this, the answer was right in front of me or something. I'm like, oh yeah, I could have done that. It just didn't even occur to me because I know so much now.
Mhm.
So there's that famous, I think, expression. I think it's called Occam's razor. And it means like whatever's the most obvious like solution, do that first. Like if you see a nail in the wall, like use a hammer. Like
Mhm.
don't think of all the other things you're going to use. So number one, I would say that's a great framework to use in your own life. Like just what is the most obvious thing going on for you? The second thing I would say, and speaking to your point on mindset, I did like hundreds and hundreds of intake calls over the last 2 years, and people coming into my coaching program, and I would ask them, I would say, all right, listen, like you've been dealing with these 25 pounds of overweight for years now, or you've tried things and they've worked and then they didn't. Like you tell me, like, what is the biggest challenge, or what's the biggest barrier holding you back right now? And
Mhm.
every single time, Julie, they would never say to me, Joel, I know I just need to work out more, I need to eat healthier. Like you would think they would say that. They didn't. They would say, I'm not consistent and I'm not committed.
Mm.
And that's a mindset issue. Every single time I would say, exactly, that's a mindset issue. So you're right. Going back to the mindset piece is huge. And you've got to dial that in. Now, I'm going to speak another point on like emotions in a second, but that point about mindset, like, what are your values? What's your vision? What clarity? What do you start asking yourself these questions like, man, what do I really want in life?
Mhm.
What do I stand for? Most people don't even know what they stand for. So when push gets to shove and the world just pushes them in the direction they want because they woke up and they had a bad day or it's really busy, they're not living the highest version of themselves because they don't even know what that would mean. They don't
Mhm.
have any identity to come back to. They're just letting, the drivers that cut them off and piss them off in traffic to destroy and take their joy and take hold of them. But you don't have to. Obviously, we know people that get cut off and they're like, oh, that guy must have been in a hurry. How does
Yeah.
that person relate to stress differently? It's mindset. It's framing. It's putting yourself in that state every day. People always say to me, Joel, you're so energetic. You're so optimistic. And I'm like, yeah, because I get up at 4:30 every day and I work at it. Like it's no accident that I show up energized for this podcast because I'm alive, I'm ready, but I condition my mind and I've done it for years and years over and over again. So it, again, back to your point, it takes that work, and mindset is a big one for sure.
Mhm.
And then in the last part, you're talking about the emotional health piece of that. A lot of people are looking for, there's so much I've seen. The body is beautiful and it has this innate intelligence. It can heal on its own. And
Mhm.
most people are not giving, like, go back to the mindset. They're not giving their body the right input, they're not communicating with their cells. Like, you can heal. You are able to. You know how many
Yeah.
people I've talked to that are like, Joel, I have MS. I have multiple sclerosis. Like, I can't heal. Like, I have to do chemo. I have to do this. And unfortunately, I already know for those people, I can never save you. I can never help you, because I could give you all the detoxes and the protocols in the world. Your subconscious mind is like, nope, I can't heal. I have MS. This is what I have, and this is what I'm going to live with forever. I don't believe that. And I've seen people reverse MS. So of course I don't believe that, but you have to believe it. It's not just me that has to believe it. You actually have to believe it. So that's a mindset piece. And then the last thing I'm going to tell you is this is presence. So often we are so not present, including myself, is that we're going from place to place to place, and we're going to. I've worked people through this process of just becoming present and feeling what it's like to be in their bodies. Like, where is the pain? Oh, I have pain here. Okay, feel that. Like, feel what that's like. Most of us avoid it. We push it away. We don't. We were taught, including myself, not to feel pain. That's not okay. That's a bad feeling. That's yucky. Well, sometimes you need to feel these things, and the more present you can become, a lot of times these things like anxiety, depression, all of these things start to go away. The more you bring presence back into your life, I bet even things like weight loss or autoimmune and other conditions will start to at least alleviate a little bit. I can't promise they're going to go away forever, but they will get better. And just tuning into presence is going to be a huge key for your listeners.
I love that. And nobody talks about that. So I'm so glad that you brought that up, because, and then also this idea of, if you believe that it's not going to help, it absolutely won't. I mean, I was a personal trainer for years and a nutrition coach, and those people that didn't believe that they could lose the weight didn't. And they were and I know that they were doing, I mean, either these people were actually doing everything perfectly, but as soon as they believed it, then all of a sudden it like fell off and they were better and healthier, but it didn't work until they believed it.
Yeah, I mean, there's a famous phrase that I love from a metaphysical teacher. He says, where there's no faith, there's no cure.
Oh, that's right. Ooh, that's beautiful. Well, we are almost out of time. We have about 3 minutes left. I'm just curious if there's anything you'd love to share with the audience that maybe, you haven't already, or a point that you'd love to let people walk away with.
Yeah. Wow. I mean, we've covered so many topics from the fatherhood side to the health side. I mean, I can't think of anything else. I would just say I'm super passionate, like I mentioned earlier, and I think we dove into it. I'm just super passionate about up-leveling and upgrading men's marriages and their fatherhood, because the more I think about it, and we talked about it, is the suicide, like at a higher level. Like, I mean, what if we can like start to change the impact of mental health and suicide? I had two first responders I knew, and when they committed suicide because it was over a relationship issue. It
Oh, wow.
was, man, I found out my wife's cheating on me. I'm going to go blow my brains out. Oh man, I had an argument with my girlfriend. I'm going to go take my life. Like, that's a travesty. And so again, I talk about this and I really believe it and mean it, because I've seen it in my own life. I want to stress it's a skill. We got to up level. These are actually skills, and you got to develop them over time. And it's actually possible. And the more we can do that, man, we're preventing things like suicide. And on top of that, the last thing is, imagine, your impact on your kid's life and your wife's life and your family's life, that will go for generations and generations to come. And so you just think about the legacy you will leave. It's really, really powerful. I used to think health was the ultimate wealth, and I still do believe that, but I've kind of taken a back seat a little bit to health and said, what about our relationships? Because when that's not safe, there's just so much you can't do, and you can't be the best entrepreneur you want to be when you go back to a home that's not a safe place to be. So that's what I would say. And if there's anything I can do to help with that, I'm happy to help anybody.
I love that. And I'm with you. Relationships are right up there with health. I mean, you need your health in order to live, obviously, but relationships are, to me, just as important as health. And I just, as somebody who's finally in touch with her feelings again, it's taken me a long time to get there. And so I appreciate you saying that. One more time, could you hold up your book for us as well?
Absolutely.
I want to see that. And you can buy this on Amazon. So go to Amazon, get Ignite. It's worth the read. Joel, I just want to say thank you so much for being on the show today. It has been an absolute pleasure to see you again and pick your brain about so many different topics. So thank you so much.
Thanks, Julie.
And everyone, that is all the time that we have for today. So thank you for being here, and we'll see you again very soon.